Yo, what's good, y'all? It's the Mad Gamer back with another one. On this episode, we're going to be looking at IGN, how Dreamcast killed the Sega hardware reign. I'm really interested in this. I used to love Sega Dreamcast. Sega. I was a Sega dude. I was on the Sega side instead of Nintendo, you feel me? So, we're going to take a look at this, see what this joint, you know what I mean? See why they said that Sega killed the hardware. It was their last system that came out. So
the biggest gone all by Sunday, the biggest launch in entertainment history. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
September 10th, 1999, the day after the US launch of Sega's new console, the Dreamcast. West Coast rapper Del the Funky Homo Sapien had just finished a gaming tin set at a San Francisco club. And now, Peter Moore, Sega of America's Senior Vice President of Marketing, stood on stage, ready to reveal the console's day one sales figures.
Yo, I cop. I don't know about y'all. I cop. Only had a couple dollars then, I copped that junk.
To the world. He lifted the paper flaps covering each digit, one by one. The crowd got louder as the millions stacked up. It roared as he flicked the last flap aside to show a total of nearly $98 million in sales. He declared it the biggest launch in entertainment history, and crucially, bigger than the US launch of the PlayStation and the Nintendo 64. It was, in his own words, a moment of euphoria. But less than 18 months later, Moore, by that point Sega of America's president, told an industry conference call that Sega was leaving the console business altogether. An 18-year era of Sega hardware, by that point Sega of America's president, PlayStation and the Nintendo 64. It was, in his own words, a moment of euphoria. But less than 18 months later, Moore, by that point Sega of America's president, told an industry conference call that Sega was leaving the console business.
Aw, man, bro. Y'all don't know about this joint, bro. Sega Dreamcast, that joint was so clean. I think it was like 200, 250. These little things, you used to put them in the controller. You could bring them other places and play the little mini games. To have like a Madden little mini game and all that. Like, you young with
altogether. An 18-year era of Sega hardware, which included 4 of the best gaming consoles of all time, was over. Sega! It's tempting to blame the swift demise of the much-loved Dreamcast on something easy and obvious. Perhaps that EA refused to put its games on the console, or that the impending PlayStation 2 spooked all the prospective buyers. But it's clear that the Dreamcast death was complicated.
We already know the PS2 did what? Something what? 65 million or something weird to this day?
Inevitable, even as Moore stepped onto that San Francisco stage. Moore joined Sega from Reebok, having never worked in games. His initial attitude to the gaming industry was that he was slightly pissed off, because he'd bought his son a Sega Saturn only for the console to be effectively abandoned by the company. But when he heard the Dreamcast's promise of online...
The Saturn was an underrated system, bro. And they said that he came from Reebok to take over Sega. Come on, man. But Sega, Saturn, that was an underestimated system, bro.
Only for the console to be effectively abandoned by the company. But when he heard the Dreamcast's promise of online gaming, it was of course the first console with a built-in modem, he was sold.
Sega Dreamcast games are now online, unleashing the ultimate horror. Your fellow Americans.
Connecting people around the world to compete or collaborate in shooters, RPGs, sports games and brawlers would be the rocket boost for console gaming, he thought. And Sega had the chance to get there first. It led Moore to coin the phrase, "We're taking gamers where gaming is going," and that's online.
We believe the future of gaming is the internet.
The Apple system was able to go online, the first one, I think. But I remember the Xbox you can go online, but the Dreamcast, I didn't remember that.
The console had stalled in Japan since its 1998 launch, but Moore and others generated excitement for the Dreamcast in the massive US market with flashy ads, celebrity appearances, and, more fundamentally, a rock-solid launch lineup that includes Soul Calibur, the first 3D Sonic game, and NFL 2K. Within 2 weeks of launch, Sega had sold 500,000 machines in the US. That's the same number that Sony would make available for the PS2's monumental US release a year later. Moore's esoteric TV marketing including the AI-themed "It's Thinking" slogan, had piqued the public's curiosity, and retailers were willing to stock their shelves with Sega's powerful, stylish machine, apparently forgiving the failure of the Saturn after many conversations with Moore and the other executives. Simon Cox
It was not letting the Saturn go. People spent a lot of money on that Sega Saturn, bro. Telling you.
the former editor-in-chief of the official Dreamcast magazine, recalls the feeling of the moment. After the complete lack of energy with the failure of the Saturn, which died a slow, horrible, fairly boring death a year or two before, the ambition was there for the Dreamcast. We had this magazine coming out, and they seemed to be putting a lot behind that. I think they did a good job generating some extra excitement, and that enthusiasm was reflected in the magazine's sales. Before long,
Yo, bro. Can we just say this now? Shenmue was overrated.
and that infused
This game was overrated. All you did was run around, hit some crates, jump on some boxes. This game was overrated, bro.
enthusiasm was reflected in the magazine's sales. Before long, official Dreamcast magazine had a circulation of more than 250,000, which put it just short of the widely read Electronic Gaming
Caliber,
Monthly.
baby.
But even then, during
Power
what might
Stone.
be considered Dreamcast's best days, seeds of doubt were sprouting.
Sonic will have to run pretty fast to catch Nintendo and Sony.
Bro, why are Seeds of Doubt? I don't understand. Alright, let's see.
But Sega's off to a good start there, having already pre-sold 300,000 of the Dreamcast consoles. The company hopes to sell 1 million units by Christmas.
Despite the initial excitement, Peter Moore wasn't fooled by the joy of launch day, saying, "It was very clear to me that this was just somewhat of a euphoric moment in time for us, but I knew that the real litmus test was going to be the following Christmas holidays." His biggest concern was bolstering a strong set of first-party games developed by a group of talented in-house studios with third-party titles.
Hey kid, how about a game? Game?
Shenmue
That game
and
was so
Phantasy
whack.
Star Online, the first proper console MMO, were coming soon, but Moore knew that that wasn't enough. Anyone considering buying a Dreamcast needed to know that the big publishers were on board, ready to pump games into the console for many years to come. As Moore flew around meeting the biggest publishers of the time, Activision, Acclaim Entertainment, Codemasters, he spoke to all the execs who were hesitant. They were kind of sitting on their hands as regard to, when are you going to commit for your next game? What does the pipeline of Dreamcast games look like for the next 3 years? And there wasn't one.
Enough talk. Now get out.
To the third.
So the companies foresaw that, look, the company duck man foresaw that the Dreamcast was going down, down, baby. Uh-oh.
Sony had announced the PS2 at the Tokyo Game Show in early 1999, to be released in the following year. After the success of the PlayStation, a successor loomed
Oh yeah, I cop. I ain't have money for the PS1. But that's the PS2 was right when I started getting cheese. Right when I started getting money.
over Moore's conversations, creating fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which Moore shortens to FUD, aka FUD, in everyone's mind. Sony's marketers did everything they could to FUD the Dreamcast, painting it as a transitional platform. Gamers and retailers were left in no doubt that while the Dreamcast was a good console, the behemoth is coming, and that's where you're all going to flock to. He
The
suspects that Sony
So that's what killed the Dreamcast. The PS2. Damn.
could also afford to pay developers
Makes
to make
sense.
their best games for PS2, but not for the Dreamcast. And Microsoft were, by this point, already having conversations about long-term deals ahead for the launch of the original Xbox, which would arrive in 2001.
For the first time, let me now unveil Xbox.
I cop. You know I cop the Xbox. Everybody know I cop the Xbox, you feel me? That shit was clean, heavy as hell, had a big ass hard drive, put all your music in it, with the Duke controller, man. What? The Godfather 3 for that joint? Xbox was an excellent console. This was like Sega, the Sega joint right here. The Sony was like the Nintendo joint at the time. It's the Nintendo 64, that shit was just doing other shit. With no graphics.
Moore
just
was
like now.
therefore stuck right between the track record of Sony and the American juggernaut Microsoft.
It is truly the future of video games, and I'm very excited to simply be a part of it if you smell what The Rock is cooking.
With a checkbook that you can't even lift off the ground, Where does that leave Sega?
Its last home console flopped, and it's seen its market share plummet from more than 50% to about 1%.
So the Saturn and the PS2, damn, that's Saturn, bro. They should have just stuck
Dreamcast
Saturn.
and Sega's
The problem was they brought the Saturn out. Nah, the real problem was the 32X. They came out with the 32X and in between the Sega and the Saturn. That's what really killed them. That 32X was trash, bro. It was an attachment. They were behind schedule. That's what really killed them, bro. That 32X. That 32X is what killed them.
People felt betrayed by the Sega Saturn, an expensive console that, as Moore found out with his son, did not get proper long-term support. This was, of course, in contrast to the earlier Sega Genesis, known as the Mega Drive outside the US, which had a long, generous tail. People had spent a lot of money to buy a Saturn, and then the games either weren't great, or there weren't enough.
What I said earlier, people wasn't letting that Saturn shit go, bro. It wasn't letting it go.
Of them. It was a lost generation, and as soon as those people knew a PS2 was coming, complete with a DVD player, which at the time was a sought-after $300 gadget, they weren't going to come back to Sega. Sega was therefore building the Dreamcast on unstable ground. It was trying to repair its reputation with retailers and gamers, while also launching the type of console that players hadn't seen before, and perhaps couldn't grasp the importance of.
Sega's new Dreamcast video game console is graphically better. The first home unit able to handle 128 computer bits of data at once. Twice as much as the Sony PlayStation and Nintendo 64 machines that dominate the $12 billion a year US video game market.
Sega successfully patched relations with retailers and generated excitement from the launch. But people who were reluctant to buy early began to ask, what's next?
Basically what happened was Dreamcast was killed off by the Saturn doing so bad. And the Saturn did so bad because it came out off time because the 32X should have never even came out. The 32X killed, it says Dreamcast killed it, but the 32X really killed it in PlayStation 2. That's what I got my sum of the video. I don't know if y'all ever had the 32X, but it literally did nothing to the graphics for the Sega Genesis. It did nothing for the graphics. Supposed to be 32 bits. It wasn't. It was trash. But man, that's ugly, bro. Sega is out of the business. They're supposed to be having like a little Dreamcast coming, but it's just about over, bro. And I was pulling for Sega the whole time, bro. But they just really couldn't recover from the 32X and the Saturn.